Max is an old German shepherd who was once the loyal companion of Daniel, a former firefighter who devoted his life to saving people. The story begins in a veterinary clinic, where Max lies silently on the operating table. His body is too weak. His regular breathing echoes in the still air. Each breath is heavy, as if the burden of a lifetime has been placed on his shoulders. The old dog has no more strength, and the veterinarian is ready to inject medicine, helping Max to pass away peacefully. But no one expected that, in the last moment of his life, Max would let out a howl. A deep, painful and desperate howl, as if calling the name of the only friend he has loved for 14 years, Daniel. That howl is not simply the painful cry of an animal about to leave. It was a cry of longing, of a soul that did not want to leave its only friend. The one who had fought beside it through so many fires, through so many long nights of confusion among the ruins. Daniel, its owner, its best friend, had been everything to Max. But what everyone did not know was that Daniel was not there. He was lying in a hospital room, suffering from a terrible cancer, his body wasting away and unable to move. Daniel could not go to Max, could not respond to that painful howl. However, something strange was happening. Max felt something. He did not know why, but he knew that Daniel was very close. He had nothing left to lose, but he did not want to end his life without seeing his dear friend one last time. Max lay motionless on the operating table of the veterinary clinic. The German shepherd's body was old, tired and weakened from years of service. His panting was regular. Each breath was labored, as if his last strength was fading. The room was silent, except for the steady ticking of the clock and Max's labored breathing. It was time to say goodbye. The veterinarian, Dr. Larson, stood beside the dog, holding a syringe containing the lethal drug. He looked at Max with regret. He had witnessed hundreds of such separations, but none of them had been easy. Max was a special dog, unlike any other. He was a hero, a warrior on the rescue battlefield, an indispensable companion in the life of his owner, Daniel. Max had saved countless lives during his 14-year career, but now, it lay motionless, with only memories of its glory days remaining. The dog looked toward the door, its eyes sad and dull. However, as the doctor prepared to inject the medicine, something unexpected happened. Max suddenly stretched, lifted his head, although his body was too weak. His ears twitched slightly, as if he heard something from afar. Then, from deep within his chest, Max let out a howl unlike any other sound he had ever made. It was not just a simple howl, but a choked cry, full of pain and despair. It was not a howl of physical pain, but a cry for help, a desperate call. The howl shook the entire clinic, causing everyone in the room to fall silent. Max was not calling for help from the doctor or anyone else in the room. He was calling for someone, Daniel, his owner. Dr. Larson stood still, not daring to act. He knew what Max was doing, even though he couldn't hear or feel. Max seemed to know that his master was very close. What Max didn't know was that Daniel wasn't there. He was lying in the hospital room, suffering from the terrible cancer. His body was so weak that he couldn't move. But Max still believed that Daniel would come, even though his body was exhausted. His loyalty and love for his only friend were still strong. He had nothing left to lose. But there was only one thing he needed: to see Daniel one last time. Before everything ended, Max's howl tore through the space, shattering all the silence. Everyone in the room couldn't help but be moved. But what surprised them was that Max wasn't just howling for himself, but for Daniel. The whole room seemed to be swept away by Max's intense urge. It was an unforgettable moment. Daniel and Max first met on an autumn morning, when Max was just a puppy who had just been trained to become a rescue dog. Daniel was a young firefighter who had just joined the city fire department. He still remembers the feeling when he first saw Max's eyes full of curiosity and unconditional loyalty. On the first day working together, Max was quite shy. But just a few days later, he became an indispensable companion in every rescue call, never giving up, even in the face of danger. Max was always ready to rush into difficult situations, save the lives of those in need, and pull the injured out of the rubble. He was not just a dog, but a warrior, a true friend of Daniel. The relationship between Daniel and Max was not just that of owner and pet. They were friends, teammates, and comrades in arms in times of danger. In the long silent nights, when they walked together through devastated villages, through raging fires, without words, just a look, a caress, was enough to understand each other. The two had proven that their friendship could not be broken no matter what happened. Daniel once thought that, if he had to face death one day, he would not be alone. He had Max by his side. The two had gone through many battles of survival together, and they had won many times. But he did not know that one day, Max would be the only friend he could not save. When Daniel was diagnosed with cancer, he couldn't accept it. The terrible disease took his health away quickly. The once strong former firefighter now struggled with weakness, with each pain he couldn't control. During his treatment, Max was always by his side, never leaving. The old dog spent his last days taking care of his beloved friend. But as time passed, Max's health gradually declined. One day, when Daniel couldn't go outside because of the pain, Max began to slow down. His steps were no longer as agile as before. The rescue calls stopped, but Max's love and loyalty remained unchanged. One day, the vet called Daniel in to inform him about Max's condition. He said that his dog had come to an end. Max was in the final stages of his life, and euthanasia would be the most humane way to spare him the pain. Daniel couldn't accept it. He begged the doctor to give him a chance to see Max one last time. But he was too weak to move. But he didn't give up. And then, a miracle happened. Daniel sat in the hospital room, holding his phone, staring at the screen. The doctor told him that his condition was deteriorating. The cancer had spread rapidly, and he didn't have much time left. Since he found out he was sick, Daniel had tried to live positively. But sometimes he couldn't avoid moments of weakness. He had fought alongside Max, his loyal canine dog, through many dangers, but now, he had to face death alone. When the doctor told him that Max was in the veterinary clinic, his health was too weak and he was about to die, Daniel couldn't bear it. He picked up the phone and called the veterinarian. His voice was hoarse and trembling. "Let me see Max. Even if I can't go, I will find a way. He can't die alone." The veterinarian didn't know what to say. He understood Daniel's condition, knew that just one wrong move could take his life. But looking at Daniel's determined and loving eyes, the doctor knew that if he did nothing, he would regret it for the rest of his life. "Daniel, I will do my best. But you must understand that your health does not allow it," the doctor said, his voice full of concern. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He felt something in his body, a strong urge that he could not explain. He could not let Max die without seeing him one last time. Despite the excruciating pain, he was determined to make the journey, even if there was only a sliver of hope. He called his medical team, asked them to put him in a wheelchair, ready for the journey. What he felt at that moment was not only physical pain, but also the desire to see his friend who had been by his side for so many years. Max had always been his most loyal friend. No matter where he was, no matter what he did, he knew Max would never leave him. And now, he wouldn't let Max go without him. But what scared him the most was not that he wouldn't be able to see Max, but that he wouldn't have the strength to make it before it was too late. His body was weakening day by day, and every step felt heavier. But he kept going, not allowing himself to stop. Daniel felt waves of pain rising in his body. Despite his efforts to stay strong, each step he took in his wheelchair felt like his body was being weighed down by an unbearable burden. But in his heart, there was only one thought: he had to see Max. Just seeing his dog again would make everything worthwhile. They didn't know what they would do when they got there. Whether Daniel's health would allow him to enter the clinic, or whether Max would be able to wait for him. But at this moment, both friends could only look to each other. Regardless of everything, the medical team had prepared for an emotional meeting. The door to the veterinary clinic opened, and in the quiet space, only the soft footsteps of the medical staff remained. They didn't say anything, but everyone knew they were witnessing a special moment. When Daniel was brought into the room, an eerie silence filled the air. Both the doctor and the nurse stood still, not wanting to break the respect for this moment. Max, lying on the operating table, still did not move. His body was thin, weak, almost lifeless. The heart rate monitors were still beeping every second, but the dog's life seemed to be left only in his weak breath. However, when the door to the room opened, Max's ears moved slightly. Although weak, he still knew that something special was approaching. Daniel, despite his body being much weaker, still tried to reach out to stroke Max's head. His eyes did not leave Max, his beloved dog, his loyal companion for many years. He no longer had the strength to stand, but his heart seemed to help him stand firm in this situation. "Max," he whispered softly. "You were waiting for me, right? I'm here." The moment Daniel reached out to touch Max's head, the old dog seemed to recognize his best friend. It couldn't move much, but a little light flashed in its eyes. A tail wagged slightly, as if to say, "I've been waiting for you." The whole room was silent. All eyes were on the emotional moment between Daniel and Max. Every second seemed to last forever. No one in the room dared to breathe heavily. Everyone understood that this was a wonderful moment of unconditional friendship. A moment that could change the heart of anyone who witnessed it. Max didn't need to do anything more. Just lie still in Daniel's arms. It seemed that the dog knew that he didn't have to go alone anymore. The years together, the battles together, all like a story ended with a gentle touch. Daniel gently raised his hand to stroke Max's fur, feeling the warmth even if it was just a little. He couldn't cry. He didn't want to cry. He just needed to know that he had arrived in time. In time to see Max again before the dog left. "Thank you, Max. You're my best friend." Daniel choked up, but there was no crying. Only peace in his heart. He looked at Max, and felt the meaningful years they had spent together. Max let out a soft breath, as if in response to Daniel's words. And in that moment, both friends understood that this moment was all they needed. Everything else no longer mattered. Only this friendship, and the peace of seeing each other one last time. Dr. Larson stood in the corner of the room, looking at Daniel and Max with emotion in his eyes. He had seen many farewells between owners and pets, but never had he witnessed such a strong connection. Sometimes, the love between humans and pets could transcend even death. And this, he realized, was true friendship. Max didn't move much anymore, but his eyes still lit up when Daniel touched him. Despite his weak breathing, the dog had not given up. He had waited patiently until Daniel arrived. And now, even though he had to leave, he had found peace in the arms of his best friend. This moment will live forever in Daniel and Max's hearts. Not just as a goodbye, but as a promise that their friendship would never end. Darkness enveloped the city as the ambulance carrying Daniel began to roll toward the vet. Outside, the streetlights flickered dimly, as if silently watching Daniel's journey. In the car, Daniel leaned tiredly against the side of the car. But not for a second did he stop thinking about Max. He knew that time was running out. Not only for him but also for the dog he loved. Every rumble of the wheels on the road was a reminder of the urgency. But his health seemed unable to bear the challenge any longer. His body was exhausted, weak, but his mind could not shut off. Always thinking of only one thing, Max. As the ambulance passed through the deserted streets, where the darkness was thick and only the dim lights from the distant houses were visible, a strange feeling rose in Daniel's heart. He couldn't explain it, but something made him feel like he was approaching the end of his days fighting the disease. And the end of a life filled with love for Max. Meanwhile, in the veterinary clinic, Max was still lying on the operating table. His body was weak, panting, but his eyes were still open, still silently looking towards the door. Although he couldn't speak, Max seemed to know what was going on. He knew Daniel was near. He could feel the presence of his beloved friend, even though they were a city apart. The doctors and nurses in the clinic were all silently observing, no one daring to do anything that could break the tense atmosphere. They knew that not only was Max waiting, but perhaps Daniel was also fighting to get there in time. "Max won't be waiting much longer," Dr. Larson said softly, not in comfort, but as a truth everyone understood. "But he probably won't leave before Daniel gets there." Time seemed to slow down. Max let out a long breath, then inhaled again, trying to keep going, even if only for a few moments. He didn't know if Daniel would make it in time, but he wasn't giving up. Their friendship had been built through many trials, many dangerous rescues, and he believed that Daniel wouldn't let him go alone. Dr. Larson looked at the monitor that monitored Max's vital signs. His heart was beating irregularly. His breathing was starting to slow. But the remarkable thing was that Max's eyes didn't dim. He was still looking toward the door, still waiting. Meanwhile, in the ambulance, Daniel felt the exhaustion in his body. The pain shot like electric sparks through his body. But he still clenched his hands on the side of the ambulance, trying to stay awake. "I have to make it. I have to make it." He whispered to himself. He could feel the fatigue in his body. The feeling that he couldn't take it anymore. But deep down, he knew there was no other choice. He had to do something last for Max, so that the dog wouldn't have to die without him. I can't let him die alone, Daniel thought. He spent his life saving people, protecting me. I can't leave him in his last moments. Back in the clinic, the atmosphere gradually became heavy. The tension of the waiting moment was felt throughout the room. Max continued to breathe, but each breath was a constant battle. Max's heart monitor was beeping steadily, but it was clear that the faint signs meant that time was running out. Nurse Emily, who had been watching Max all this time, stood by the operating table, not daring to take her eyes off the dog. She looked into Max's eyes, which were still strangely bright, as if she knew he was being waited for. Max is waiting for Daniel, Emily whispered, not believing what she was seeing. He's not giving up. He's weak, but he's strong. The others in the room nodded, their eyes filling with tears. They knew Max was more than just a dog. He was a friend, a comrade, a hero. They knew that Max had fought his whole life, and now all he wanted was one thing: to see his best friend again. Max lifted his head slightly, his eyes still fixed on the door. The next few seconds seemed to last forever. The whole room stood still. No one dared to breathe loudly, as if afraid to interrupt this sacred moment. And then, in the dark of night, when Daniel was almost exhausted, the ambulance rolled into the clinic. In the last moments, the two friends would have the chance to meet again. Daniel's steps, no matter how tired, still moved forward, because he knew that he had arrived at the right time. Max was waiting. Daniel could not keep Max waiting any longer. Dr. Larson stood there, unable to contain his emotions. He knew this was the last moment, but the love and loyalty between Daniel and Max had overcome everything. Max had waited until Daniel arrived, and now, when they were together, these moments of parting were no longer simply a departure, but a promise kept. Max let out a final sigh. In the arms of his best friend, Daniel kissed Max's head, feeling the warmth of his body. "Thank you, Max. Thank you for everything. You did a great job." And in that moment, Max passed away peacefully, knowing he would never be alone again. After Max died, Daniel sat silently beside his dog. He didn't cry. He didn't need to cry, because in both of their hearts, they knew that even in death, their friendship would never fade. And when Daniel finally passed away, there was a sense of peace and serenity in the room. Their story will live on in the hearts of those who know it.